Alright, so I have your application here. All of that looks good. Took a look at your letters of rec and your personal statement, and I like those, but, I want to get to know you a little bit more. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, and she said it was the longest labor that she had had with any of my siblings. And that's when I got into t-ball. And then there was this guy in kindergarten named Billy. That was the moment that I realized that whole milk was not for me. The dreaded tell me about yourself question. It's one that you're going to be asked in almost every single interview, and it's the one that I hear over and over again that students are the most nervous to answer. So that's what we're talking about today. After doing more than half of my interviews for the entire season, I can really tell why this is the sort of question that students are really, really nervous to answer. And I think it's overall because the question is so vague and you're not really sure what they're looking for out of it. Especially in an even more difficult interview environment that we have in 2020 where we can't meet anybody, and it's even more important for them to get to know us as much as possible over the virtual setting. This question has even more value. But like I mentioned, it's one of the questions that students are most nervous to answer because we don't know exactly what is important in our lives in order to talk about, and B, we don't know the kinds of things that the program wants to hear, and we don't want to say the wrong thing. And also, the interviews this year are between 15 and 25 minutes, so we don't want to take up too much time with this initial question and then not leave any extra time at the end to ask our questions or to feel like the rest of the interview is rushed to get through all of the interviews, extra questions they had for us. So with my interview experience thus far this season, and with reaching out to other students online and throughout my school to kind of figure out what's worked for them, these are my biggest tips to help answer that dreaded tell me about yourself interview question. From what I've discovered and what I've experienced during this interview cycle, the general consensus and the thing that I'll say is that you want to keep this answer between about a minute and 90 seconds, and I certainly wouldn't go over 2 minutes when answering this question. Limited amount of time that we have during these interviews makes this all the more difficult, and it's definitely the reason why you should certainly come prepared and know a general layout of what you're going to say and keep it within that time frame. Now, you certainly don't want your answer to come out like super rehearsed or robotic, because then that won't look good on you either and they'll think you're not being genuine. But it definitely helps to kind of have a layout that you keep in your head so that when it's time to answer that question, you have a general consensus of where you're going from step by step to get out your story and give them the answer that they're looking for to get to know you more. So that layout that I use is time before medical school, what got me interested in medical school, and then what got me interested in that particular specialty. This sort of gives your interview a little bit more information about your upbringing and kind of what took you into the pathway of wanting to go to medical school, and then once in, how did your interests come alive so that you would eventually pursue that specialty. During this whole process, you can drop little bits of information here and there that help set you up to be a great candidate for that specialty or that specific program. To give you an example of this, I applied to a lot of programs mostly condensed in the Midwest because ultimately that's where my family is and that's where I want to end up. So I always start off by talking about how I was raised in St. Louis. I am in school in Kansas City and I really love the Midwest environment. Another example of this would be me applying for the specialty of physical medicine and rehab, which is very well known to be a team-based specialty. You have a lot of players with your therapists, your social workers. So I always add in a little tidbit there about how I got really interested in team sports when I was younger, and I played that throughout my younger years, and how I really enjoyed being a part of that team environment. Now, by doing this, I am giving them more information about myself, and I am answering the question, but at the same time, I'm planting little seeds of information that will help me explain why I'm interested either in that particular program or in the specialty that I'm applying for. And if they ask you a more specific question later on about why you're picking your said specialty or why you are interested in that particular program, you can kind of lean back on these little pieces of information and, of course, add more after that. Now, the reason I talk about why getting into med school as part of that layout is because, before you even think about joining that specialty, they need to know that you're genuine about being a physician in general and that you're going to be a great addition to their residency program. If you had a particular interest in that specialty from early on, and that's a big reason why you went to medical school in the first place, that's another one of those big seeds of information that you can plant in this description to help you out later on and refer back to. Now, you might be sitting there thinking about all the things I've said and wondering how you're possibly going to get this in all in under 2 minutes. And, this is certainly not a detailed description of everything that we're talking about. You're just laying the foundation of who you are, why you're where you are, and where you want to continue going in the future that helps set up the rest of the interview and give them a little bit more information about you. There's going to be time later on for them to specifically ask you why you're interested in their program, and you should hopefully have a list of reasons as per my last video that I talked about. And the same thing with your specialty. Each of these points in my layout really only requires a couple of sentences to kind of get the point across about, where you come from and why you're interested in that particular program. So no need to go into an exceptional amount of detail at this point. And this was a layout that I found when doing my own research about how to answer this question, and the reason that I use it is because it's well organized. It kind of follows a chronological order, so it's easy for me to keep track of, easy for the interviewer to keep track of, and it kind of gives them a sense of, throughout the years, why I have gotten to this point that I'm at now. Now, at this point, something that I left out in terms of that initial layout is the additional information about yourself. So, for example, if you are the first person to go to college in your family, the first person to go to med school, or if you immigrated from another country as a child and that really played a role in your development as a person and your character, then, those are definitely things to also include and kind of plant the seeds of whenever you're talking about yourself and answering this question. Similarly, if there was a specific moment in your life that kind of led you down this pathway, be it, wanting to go to medical school or a moment in med school that really led you down this specialty, certainly be sure to include that. But again, make sure you're not going into too crazy amounts of detail, because right now we're just laying the foundation, giving them just a little bit more information to kind of set up the rest of the interview. Another thing I'll tell you is that there are plenty of ways to go about answering this question. This is certainly not the only way. It is just something that I found to be useful and something that I've used on my interviews and have gotten good responses to. Certainly feel free to do your own research and make sure you practice. This is something, like I said earlier, you don't want to be too rehearsed or sound robotic, like you just memorized every word, but you want to make sure you have the general idea so you don't get lost and so you can make it seem succinct and organized. So make sure you practice either with yourself in the mirror or talk to a trusted friend or relative and make sure that they like what you're saying and that it sounds good coming from the other end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video today and took something out of it. This is certainly a difficult question to answer and something that I struggled with early on when prepping for interviews and now feel much more comfortable with it. If you have any other questions about this particular interview topic or want to hear about something else in relation to interviews, make sure to drop a comment down below. I'll respond with my honest feedback. And as always, I'll see you next time.